Hi class, hope this finds you all well and that you had a nice weekend. Um, Today I'm going to be introducing our next project and talking to you a little bit about composition and kind of what's going to go into this project. But ultimately, this is going to be, so far up to this point, we've been dealing primarily with 100% technical drawing basics. Uh, it's a shorter semester because of the late start, but so there's a few things we didn't go too deep on that, we might normally have, but generally we've covered kind of all the basics. And so, as we saw in the beginning, those basics will help you make a good technical drawing, but doesn't necessarily make it a good piece of art as a drawing or through the drawing medium. So we're going to start pushing more towards that direction with this project and our final project. Veering off of the syllabus a little bit here because I realize, our final projects are due on the 18th, and that's not even 3 weeks from now. So we really don't have a lot of time. I'm going to leave out the grid drawing project, and we're giving you a little bit more time for this unconventional self-portrait project, which I'll talk to you about now. And then we'll have our final project. But these last two projects are more conceptual or idea based. So, we are going to have one more exercise starting on Thursday that is kind of more on the technical side, a longer term still life. But this project in particular is going to kind of riff off of those self-portraits we did. So the self-portraits we did in class, in your exercises in class last week, were a traditional conventional self-portrait. You're drawing yourself. So the purpose of this project is it's called an unconventional self-portrait, and rather than drawing a picture of yourself, you're going to choose to draw something that represents a piece of who you are. So, what are you passionate about? What do you believe? Where are you from? You don't need to include all of that, and I would recommend not trying to do too much. Choose something about yourself that's important, that you want to communicate. Remember, don't draw anything that you're uncomfortable with me seeing, because I'm going to have to look at these and grade them. But really, it could be a lot of different. It's really wide open. It's idea based, but the idea is that concept is you. For our final project, you're going to come up with your own concept altogether, and we're going to talk about that through a slideshow and whatnot. But this is an easier way to start. It's kind of a predecessor to that project because you know you better than anyone else does. So you're going to choose a part of what makes you you and try to make a drawing of that. I'm going to share my screen here so that we can actually look at this project outline together and kind of talk about it a little bit deeper. I'm going to show you some quick little sketches on how you can figure out how to do this. Got a week and a half, so these aren't due until a week from Thursday. So, it's another big project. Sorry, my phone's right here. Okay, so share my screen. All right, so as you can see here, you're going to be turning in the following: one drawing on nice paper, at least a half sheet in size, using any materials that we have dealt with in class so far. So we've done some collage type stuff. You could incorporate that. We've drawn with ink and charcoal and pencil. So primarily it's that. It's still a black and white drawing. You'll be graded on the following. It's just an overall sense of what you're going to be graded on. There's a rubric at the bottom of this that you can look at for greater detail, but your ability to use symbolism to represent ideas. So what does that mean? We'll talk about that here in a little bit. How you compose your drawing, where you put everything. Contrast, placement of images. This says special, but it should say spatial. Spatial relationships. Your ability to follow these project guidelines below, and the time and effort you put in your project. So pretty similar to most of our projects. So once again, jumping off that traditional self-portrait, you're going to be making a drawing that represents you, but isn't necessarily a picture of yourself. It's not to say that you can't put yourself, a little bug here. It's not to say that you can't put yourself in the drawing, but but you don't have to, it doesn't have to have you in it. We'll talk about different ways you can put yourself in or ways that you can choose not to. You can choose, the image will represent who you are, what you believe in, what you love, where you come from, etc. And you can choose a few things that represent you or just one aspect of what makes you who you are. I recommend trying not to make that symbolism too complex and try not to cover every element of who you are, because it's impossible to bring that all into one drawing. So just get a little specific. This part of me is really important. I want to communicate that. So part of this image can be abstracted, like you could draw kind of more intuitive mark making or include patterning or whatever is there, but I still want most of the drawing to be from life or from photographs. So it says here, one way to think of this is sort of a drawn collage where you can combine different images. For example, landscape of where you grew up, family symbols, portraits of loved ones, etc. You could draw one scene that represents a specific symbol or history identity, you know, for a landscape or an object of meaning. So you could literally take a picture of, you know, a mountain that you saw your whole life growing up that had significance to you and just draw that from that photograph. That could be it. Or you could then choose to combine other symbolism in that as well. But it could be as simple as just a drawing of the mountain. And then, you know, you could also, we've done still life setups and drawn those. You could do that. You could take some objects that maybe, you know, they're family heirlooms or something that is of great value and importance to that story of who you are, and set that up and draw from life that way. So all this to be said, part of this is going to be drawn from life or photographs, and then some of it can be just kind of whimsically made up as well. Once again, this would be a drawing on your nice paper that at least half sheet in size. As usual, I prefer to see completed smaller drawing. It says no smaller than half sheet of nice paper, but if you think, I'd rather see a completed drawing than an unfinished drawing. So if you think what the image that you're going for is going to be really crazy detailed and even a half sheet is too big for, you know, the required minimum 8 to 10 hours, then just email me and we can talk about it, and you could probably go even smaller. So I'd rather see really detailed, small finished piece than a big one that was just too ambitious. I mean, ultimately, you know who you are better than me or anyone really. So I can't tell you what to draw, but I just want you to think about, spend some time before you start drawing, making a plan. Like, what is it you want to communicate about yourself? An easy way to start, if you can't figure anything out, is what are you passionate about? What do you care about? What interests you? Sometimes those things can be really deep and philosophical, and other times they can just be super straightforward and simple. Like, I'm just asking you to think on a deeper level about it. So like, it could be as simple as, oh, I ride dirt bikes. Okay, well, what is it about the dirt bike that is so important to you? Is it something you grew up doing with your family and it reminds you of, you know, your childhood? Is it getting out into these deep parts of nature? Or is it the mechanics of it? Like you like how things work and to take things apart and put things together, in which case maybe you just draw the motor. Or, you know, is it about adrenaline and adventure? All those things will affect what you draw, because you want to communicate that specific part of it into the drawing. I'm also going to include here that I want a short paragraph of you explaining what you drew and how that relates to who you are and why you chose to draw what you did. Once again, you don't have to get too personal about it, but just some broad information about it that helps me understand what you drew and why. Think about, if you do want to combine multiple imagery, how are you going to combine that? One rule for this project is I don't want to see any words on it. No words at all. We're not a writing class. I don't want words. I don't want written explanations on your drawing. You're going to include a written explanation, a short paragraph with the project, but I don't want to see, you know, sometimes I'll see someone and it's like they draw a picture of themselves and there's a thought bubble and then they just write everything out. like I said, we're not a writing class. I want you to be able to communicate with images. So, you know, it's not a requirement that we look at your drawing and know exactly what it means. That's not always. Sometimes it's good with art to, you know, hit someone over the head with the idea so that they just can't avoid it. But it's okay to be a little bit more ambiguous and loose with it. Like, as long as your intentions are there and you're thinking on those deeper levels of why it's important, why include this, then, you know, I think that you're on the right path. Some ways I've seen people do this before, like I said, I've seen people just draw landscapes or draw the house from the outside that they grew up in, or draw a specific place, or draw a specific object that's important to them. I saw one person that did draw themselves, and he drew a self-portrait, but he grew up snowboarding up on Mount Baker, and so that's a huge part of his identity and how he defined himself. So it was him in the snowboard gear from the shoulders up. He had goggles and a helmet, and in the goggles was a reflection of the mountain. So that's a more creative, like, that's a pretty straightforward way of doing it. It's still a self-portrait, but it was a creative and unique way of putting it together. You know, thinking about your composition, that can have a huge effect on how the image reads and, you know, what we might kind of take away from it. So I'm going to show you some examples. You know, one way to think about this is even, it's like writing a list of things that are important to you and then trying to go deeper on why and what kind of symbolism could represent that. But for one, if you decide, okay, my name is Bob, I like hamburgers and I love my cat, like, this is pretty much what I don't want to see. So let's say this is, I'm gonna go off the shared screen so you can see this a little better. Okay. So sometimes I like to just sketch these thumbnails to get a sense of what my composition is going to look like. But if what I don't want to see is you're like, okay, my name's Bob in bubble letters, and then I really love hamburgers. So here's a hamburger. And I have a cat named Rufus, or whatever your cat's name is. And that's it. And it's just all this stuff kind of floating in space. First off, I think that that's great if you're Bob and you love hamburgers and cats and that's as deep as it goes, that's fine. But there's got to be a more creative way that you can combine these images. You know, what kind of space are you dealing with? You just randomly haphazardly put stuff on the page, or do you think about how these images interact with one another and how that helps communicate your Bob hamburger loving catness? You know, another way to think about this is, you know, if you decide maybe the concept about yourself is this kind of like duality of, you know, you grew up between these two places, the oceans and the mountains. So you decide, okay, an ocean, a wave represents the ocean and a mountain represents this other place of where you grew up. And you can think that, okay, I'm just going to include a wave and a mountain. One way I like to start dealing with composition is I'll draw it out. You know, your image doesn't have to be vertical this way. It could be horizontal that way. So you can start just drawing these small thumbnails. I'll do 2 of each in each direction. And then I know I've got mountain and I've got wave. So, you know, you'll see me just start playing with composition here. And this is a really helpful tool of how to figure this out. And I do this every time and recommend you do this, because if you just start diving in without experimenting and sketching, you're missing out on the opportunity to kind of think about what other ways you could compose this. So let's say you got mountain here, and then there's this like big wave in the background. That's one mountain wave. And then maybe in this one, you've got this big wave coming this way, crashing up onto this mountain here. And then maybe on this one, you do the opposite, where there's, you know, some sort of wave towards the bottom, big mountain coming up from the top. Or maybe you get really weird on this one. You have a mountain here, another upside down mountain there, with like waves coming from either side. You know, this took me, what, 30 seconds, and I've already got a variety of different ways I've considered composing this image. sometimes I'll do like 30 of these just real quick. And then I decide, you know what? I kind of like just the simplicity of this one here. And that's the one I'm going to use. And then I'll start gathering reference images. So like specific mountain, where'd you grow up? What mountain is it? If it's Mount Hood or if it's Mount Adams or Mount Whitney, whatever, get pictures of that you print off the internet for reference. Or you sit outside if you can see it on a nice day. Get pictures of the water. If you know Photoshop, you can kind of mess with putting your images together there. But you know, composition is going to be a big part of how successful your image is, and that's what we're going to start dealing with throughout the rest of the semester. So how are things put together on the page? You know, it's easy, like we've talked about in the past, to just put it smack dab in the centered. But you know, sometimes it could be more effective to have, you know, an image that breaks the page. You only see part of it on the page, but you know that the rest of it is there outside of it. You know, where do you want the focus to be? What's darkest? What's lightest? Those are all decisions that you're going to be making, and it's hard to teach how to make an effective composition. It's just trial and error. You learn it through drawing, and some things work and some things don't, which is why I really like doing this kind of sketching off the bat. So that's basically the gist of the project. You know, one thing I wanted to talk to you about a little bit is trimming your page and using your X-Acto knives so that you don't cut yourself, for one, and that, you know, you've got a nicely presented project. But let's say that I've got this, I'm just using newsprint for the purpose of this demonstration. Let's say you were going to use a half sheet of newsprint. What I would do first is grab let me grab one of these rulers here. A ruler, you know, you carefully tear it out, and then maybe you measure. If this is, you know, 24 inches, you measure 12 at the bottom, you measure 12 at the top, draw a nice line down the middle with your ruler. And then you know you need to cut right there. You can trim your edges down that way too. Like if when you tear it out, you get this little like rip in the corner, you could trim that down in a way that keeps everything really nice and clean. But when you're cutting this with an X-Acto blade, the reason we want to use X-Acto blades is because there's no way, no matter who you are, that you're going to cut this as clean with scissors as you would with an X-Acto blade, because the nature of scissors, you're cutting and then you're releasing and then you're cutting more. So with that release, it prevents you from getting a perfectly straight edge. So we've got razor blades in our packet, like so. I think it's best to use one of these self-healing mats, but they're expensive. So it's not, you know, it's one of these and you can cut on top of it. I've had this, they're expensive, 40, 50 bucks, but I've had this since 2007 or something like that. So, you know, lasts a lot longer than, you know, spend 40, 50, 100 bucks on a pair of shoes that last you a few months. So it's a good investment, but if you don't want to go out and buy one of those, for the meantime, you can just use the cardboard on the back of your newsprint as a cutting surface. This will get chewed up and you won't be able to use it anymore. But if I were to cut right on my table, it's going to cut into the table. Then every time I draw there, it's going to pick up that mark. So ultimately, let's say I'm just using this. So back of this cardboard. I'm going to angle this so you can see. So what I'll do is I'll line up my ruler or my straight edge. There's no way to really do this without a straight edge. Right on that line. And then this might sound obvious to some of you, but believe me, I've seen in a lot of classes people cut themselves and also mess up their drawing by accidentally slicing into it. So if this is the side that I'm keeping, I'm going to cut on this side. I'm going to put my pencil or my ruler on the inside so that I'm cutting the outside. This part is not going to be my actual drawing. That's because if this slips, oops, I'm more likely to cut this area than I am to cut the actual drawing. So if you're trimming down a finished drawing, this is important because you don't want to accidentally slice into your finished drawing. If you're doing this, you know, trimming this down before you actually are drawing on it, you know, just trimming down a blank piece of paper, there's less risk there. But sometimes you decide, oh, hey, the edges here are really messy. I just want to trim this drawing down. So what I'm going to do is place my hand down and put pressure on with a wide kind of grip. And you can see I'm only going to be able to go about halfway down. So what I'm going to do is push real hard, run that X-Acto right against the edge. And when I get to my thumb, I'm going to walk it down, keeping the pressure on. And then I'm going to go down the rest of the way. The reason I don't just cut from here all the way down is sometimes you start putting pressure down here and that thing can slip and then you slice into the page. So you're better off coming down about the length of your hand and then walking it down and going the rest of the way. And then you've got a nice clean edge to your page. So pretty straightforward, but like I said, it's worth, you know, it's worth seeing for safety purposes for one, but also, you know, how to have a clean presentation and not mess up your drawing. So I'm going to be looking at presentation for this project, especially for a final project, which will be worth 200 points coming up next. And is it smudgy? Is it wrinkly? If you leave borders around the drawing, are they nice and clean? How well did you trim it down? Is it all kind of a wonky edge? You know, those are all things that I'm going to be looking at. As far as the master study project, I was gone all weekend up on the mountain with my little fam. So I still have a couple more to grade, and I will get those up and posted here before Thursday or by Thursday. But let me know if you guys have any questions about this project. It's another big one, so I recommend, you know, we've got a week and a half. Start early, start today with sketching. That's all we're doing today. So spend the time you would spend a day on, you know, regular exercises to be working on this, and then, or at least sketching out, thinking about what you want to do. And then on Thursday, we're going to start our final kind of still life drawing for the semester. So, like I said, any questions, let me know. Look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. Thank you.